Hi, everyone. We're presenting a paper called Unpacking the Nature of Social Structures as the Materials of Service Design. And my name's Josina Vink. I'm from the Oslo School of Architecture and Design in Norway.
And my name is Kaisa Koskela-Huotari, and I'm from CTF Service Research Center from Karlstad University. So service design is a process of transforming the materials of service. And as the understanding of service has evolved over time, so has the understanding of what these materials actually are about. And throughout the time, we can see a shift from a emphasis on more of the tangible aspects of service to the more intangible aspects and materials of service. And especially recently, there has been a big emphasis on social structures as the central design material. So with social structures, we mean invisible aspects that tie human beings together. These can be norms, these can be rules, roles, beliefs, frames, different kinds of things that we almost without thinking about them follow in our everyday lives. So what we want to do with this paper then is to extend this understanding of what does it mean if social structures are the central design materials, and then develop a practical approach, the Iceberg blueprint of social structures for attending the social structures in practice. How we did this was by also developing something new. So we were thinking about the tool development process in a new way as well. So we did this by combining the kind of the more practice-driven approaches for tool development, often used in service design, with a more theory-driven approach and kind of complementing the two. So we draw from abductive approaches where we use theoretical insights. In our case, these were stemming from institutional theory about the characteristics of social structures. We used these insights to inform the tool development. And then when we were prototyping and testing the tool in practice, we could see potentially new practical challenges that then would again inform the tool, as well as the inquiry into the literature and the theory to see how we could potentially solve these issues that we were seeing in practice. So the tool really developed throughout this very iterative approach and a combination of both the theoretical and the empirical and practical insights. And next, Josina will go through the different iterations.
Thanks, Kaisa. So you can see here just a couple of examples of us kind of prototyping these different iterations in practice that Kaisa mentioned. So over the course of 4 years, we worked with over 800 people participating to use kind of this tool. And it happened within the setting of design projects, conferences, design education, and we used it across 5 different countries. So here you can see those kind of iterations that Kaisa mentioned of how it evolved from the learnings from theory and practice. There were 5 main kind of iterations that took place. So I'll just walk through them quite quickly now for you. Firstly, we understood from theory that social structures are mainly taken for granted and invisible. And that led us to use the metaphor of the iceberg to help focus people on what happens below the surface of the water, what you typically can't see within service settings. And we tried to do that to get them to identify the kind of invisible social structures. It was quite challenging to just go straight to those invisible components. So through that learning, we went back to the literature and understood that actually these invisible aspects are kind of manifested and instantiated through physical enactments. So then we started to begin our process with a focus on the physical enactments of service settings and using them then to inform the invisible components of social structures. But still, it was really challenging to get people to kind of focus and unpack things in the similar kind of service setting. So what we realized again through learnings from theory was that narratives And these kind of enactments can help focus and aid our reflections. So we began to start the process then with storytelling or with some kind of role play that then would help kind of unpack these other aspects. Even still with this, it was quite challenging to get people to think about all the different aspects of social structures. So then we started to bring forward this insight from theory, mainly driven by Scott, that there are 3 different kind of institutional pillars or main elements of these social structures, and that there are different types of physical enactments. So that helped us kind of get more robust in how we were mapping out our social structures. And lastly, even though we were getting there, there was huge parts of our service settings and the social structures that were being missed. And so we started to see that actually a big part of what drives our understanding of these taken for granted social structures is kind of the multiplicity of social structures at play and the conflict between social structures. And an important way we can see this multiplicity is by having a diversity of people and participants in the process. So we started then to really be thoughtful about who we were bringing in as part of these processes. So that's kind of an overall evolution of this tool over time. And here you can kind of see the iceberg blueprint of social structures that developed through this process. So below the surface of the water, you can see the 3 institutional pillars identified by Scott. And this helps us kind of piece some of those aspects out so we can think about the regulative components. These are the more formal rules and laws. Then there's also the normative components, the more informal norms and roles that different actors take on. And then there's also the kind of more taken for granted aspects of the cultural cognitive elements of social structures, which include kind of beliefs and frames that we have about a particular situation. And in addition, kind of above the surface of the water are the things that are more visible in these service settings, our physical enactments. So most visible are our symbols and artifacts that we use in our service situations. And then there's also the activities and relations that can help us kind of and make up our social structures. So in order to use this kind of iceberg blueprint, we identified kind of 5 critical steps to moving through the process. The first is to gather diverse perspectives, then prompt reflection using a concrete situation or narrative. Then we move into identifying those physical enactments of the particular situation. And then using those enactments, we unpack the invisible social structures. And then we move into kind of taking a step back and reflecting collectively on those social structures together. So just to put that in context, I'll give you an example and walk you through how we use this iceberg template within the context of working to address youth unemployment in Vestfold County in Norway. So this county, which is just a few hours south of Oslo, has really high rates of youth unemployment. So we got together for 2 days. We started by gathering diverse perspectives. We had service providers from that were part of the welfare agency, nonprofit organizations working to address some of these issues, some for-profit employers, as well as some designers supporting the process. And then we worked to try and prompt reflection on the situation through this kind of concrete example. And to do that, we animated a story of a youth who was supported by the welfare agency and was working through different interviews with different employers. And this came from a number of interviews and discussions that we had had with youth previously and kind of amalgamated into this story. Then by listening to the story, everyone started to unpack what are the physical enactments. So they wrote down the dialogue that was happening between this youth, Lisa, and her social worker. They noted the calendar that was driving all the social workers' activities and enactments of that nature. Then based on those enactments, they started to identify the invisible social structures. So they wrote down the role of the social worker that was so important, this how the role of youth was understood, these norms around helping that was so entrenched in the current kind of welfare state. Then kind of we got all back together after some of this reflection was done in small groups and individually. We came back all together and reflected on all of these aspects of the iceberg together and tried to identify what we wanted to maintain and what aspects might need to be challenged. And some of the aspects of social structures that they realized might need to be addressed included things like how this process, all of the kind of norms and structures in place were really making it an employer dominant and employer driven process. But they were wanting to reimagine this more as a youth driven process of hiring and things like that. They also really needed to address this bias that existed around what are called novers, which is a derogatory term for people who are supported by the local welfare agency. So these helped inform new services that might be developed to address some of these issues within the local community. And this is just one example or one use case of how this tool can be used, but of course it can be used in many different contexts, whether it's in interviews or thinking about future service situations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kaisa to just sum up with some of our main contributions.
Yes, thanks. So the paper really makes three key contributions. So first is to provide this elaborated understanding of social structures and what is their nature as we attend to them as design materials, service design materials. Second, we provide a practical approach, a tool for service designers to address social structures. So the Iceberg blueprint of social structures is what we develop in this paper. We also rethink the tool development process as such and elaborate on a new approach, which we call the abductive design research approach, which combines the theoretical insights with the more practical insights and works iteratively and combines the two.
And with that, we'll say thank you very much and just leave you with the template for the Iceberg blueprint of social structures. Feel free to do a screenshot and try it out in your next service design project to see if it can help you. And Kaisa and I would love to hear about how that goes. So feel free to tweet at us some of your experiences. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.